Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, how are you? So today, I haven't given much a warning, but I want to give a talk called Spirituality 101, The Basics. And there's a very simple, basic reason, really. It's just a lot of people I've been talking to recently and a lot of things I've been following recently sort of imply that spirituality in general is quite complicated for many, many people. And I just felt that reminding people about the basics is very helpful and very beneficial in some of these confusing times. So that's what I'm going to do. Trying to keep it fluffy and positive, but I also want to remind people that the basics are not only for beginners, also for the most very, very advanced adherents or seekers or students or even teachers. They all need to understand the basics and to check in with themselves and be reminded of what's number one and what's really important. So that's what I'm going to be going into. Say hello to Emma, anybody who's joining in. These do get uploaded into YouTube, so remember to hit those bell icons, notifications, buttons, right? So anyway, I've got some notes here, so it's going to be all set out. I'm going to be talking about why you become a seeker, your motivations, the groups that you're involved in, about your spiritual vibration, about discernment, about your spiritual practice, and about the ultimate goals of spirituality and, the planet and all that. Okay. So I'll keep it quite simple and it'll be enjoyable and positive, and it'll help beginners all the way through to advanced. So just think, if you're on a spiritual path, or if you've been doing this a tiny bit of time, or been doing this a lot of bit of time, excuse me, I'm just joking, you'll always be asking yourself, as a seeker, the question why. Why are you spiritual, in inverted commas? Because everybody's spiritual. We've all got spirit, in us. So why? And also, how did you go about the process of discovering who you are or what you were studying? And that's really hugely important, and I'll go into that very, very much. Now, there are different ways in which people can... Sorry, this itchy nose again. There are different processes about how people come to this. Now, for me, I was a seeker because I was really curious. I was studying human biology, and I found that fascinating, and then psychology, and then ultimately philosophy. And I've always been very, very curious from day one. As a baby, as a small child, my father, I'd ask questions, like, why is the sky blue? All those basic questions. So if you're naturally a seeker, then that's kind of in you, and that's kind of written in your internal programming of your personality. So I do get an itchy nose when I do this. I don't know why. One of those things. Okay, so why did you become a seeker? Now, some people are naturally curious. Some people approach it a different way. Some people are kind of avoiding some pain or trauma in their life. Now, there's nothing wrong with people having pain and trauma. If you've had a sad life, my apologies, there's no judgment there. And if you want spirituality to make your life a bit rosier and more positive, then go for it. Good on you. Good. Great. But just make sure that when you're approaching spirituality, you're not doing it as a means to avoiding. Spirituality should never be about avoiding. It should be expanding. Think of it sort of an upwards triangle. Everything opens up when you become more spiritual. And if you think about people... So I met a theologian in a church in Dunedin, and I asked him questions, and I was hoping to get into really interesting debate about the Gnostic Gospels, and I found him very closed off as a theologian. So he didn't have an inverted triangle above his head. He had a pointed triangle where everything was avoiding and restricting and closing in on him, and he was using spirituality as a tool to avoid pain or to become more narrow-minded. So that's very important. Why are you becoming spiritual, and how are you going about it? Are you trying to expand? And really, ultimately, spirituality there are risks involved, that requires a lot of courage. So if you're approaching spirituality with courage and taking risks, a typical example is that one thing you might notice when you become spiritual and you start to trust, that word trust, what does it mean to trust? Well, if there's God and if there's a purpose and if I'm taken care of, then I can take more risks. I'm learning to trust, and I'm letting go of some of these narrow, confining thought patterns and beliefs that define me. And that was very typical of me when I was in London. I worked in banking and I was a temp, as you call them, office worker. And it was very narrow and it was full of fear, and I worried about my work. But when I became spiritual, immediately I set off on a journey to become a self-employed woodcarver, and that's what I did. It was about trusting the universe, trusting God, taking risks. So often spirituality is the total opposite of what you expect. It's not about limiting. It's not about, a fine nitpicking of theological, truths in the Bible. It's not about nitpicking and becoming narrow. It's about expanding and becoming more and taking risks and having courage. So the second thing I want to talk about, Spiritual 101, is your motive, is the reason. So why are you becoming spiritual? And the most important thing is just a given, is based on the principle of oneness, that we're all connected. Is that, are you looking out for yourself, for number one, numero uno, and you're just wanting to make money? And some people do that. Some people, they just approach spirituality. And some people have asked me very, very recently, I know someone who's asked me and they want to become a healer and they want to help people, which is really, really good. But if you just want to start a spiritual business immediately, that, you become awakened or whatever, and you want to do Reiki and become a healer or learn to become a psychic, or maybe you go to a spiritualist church and you get a reading and someone sort of, pumps up your ego and say, wow, you're special and you can do this, and I can see big things in your future. You're going to go far. And if your spiritual ego gets excited about that, so, oh, great, that sounds exciting. So the motive of why you're doing spirituality, because spirituality is in the doing. What are you going to do with it once you find out? Are you going to take care of number one and make money for yourself? And want to become famous or be on stage, be a famous psychic or healer or whatever? Or are you going to be in service and to helping others? And that's the prime goal of spirituality ultimately, is that once you trust God, as a seeker, you start to see a pattern, you start to see a purpose in your life and everything around you, and then you can sort of sit back and rest, and you can go, okay, great, well, I'm taken care of, the world is full of love, I've got angels guiding me, I can sort of rest now and not worry so much. But how about I use that active energy that I've still got, and I want to help people, and I want to be in service. So that's why I thoroughly recommend, if you're on the beginning of your spiritual path, even if you're at the end, even if you're a senior, I don't care if you're 80 or 90 years old, some part of your mentality in spirituality should be ideally to want to help others. Now, you don't have to do what I did, and the first thing I did when I had spiritual enlightenment is I went to a church and I said, please, I want to help. So they said, come by on a Thursday evening. It was around the back of Selfridges in Regent Street, and it was a church right around the back streets. And I went into the crypt that's downstairs, and I served teas and coffees to the homeless people, and I chatted with them. And when I first started, I really, wanted to help, and I was a little bit anxious. Homeless people, could they be dangerous or have schizophrenia? But I met some really fascinating people. I even met a man who was in the diamond industry, and he was involved in a war in Africa and going through various checkpoints. And he was a very interesting conversationalist. So just be aware. I would thoroughly recommend that before you start any spiritual business, that you try out belonging to a voluntary organisation. I did suicide counselling with the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Centre in Culver City in Los Angeles, and I've done lots of voluntary work over the years. And I'm just really putting this out there because this is very important, and that is that spirituality is about the doing. Hello, Rianne and Christina, who's joining. Lovely to meet you all. So spirituality is in the doing. Spirituality is not just sitting there comfortably in your, chintz armchair, philosophizing, just talking and discussing. It's not that. It's what you do with it. Are you working in your community to make your community a better place? Because if you love God, and if you realize that God is love, and that your soul in here, inside your heart, that you're an extension of God's loving energy, then what would God do? And that's a question you can ask yourself. It's a very good basic question. If you're confused about your spiritual path, just said, what would God do, or what would love do, or what would Jesus do, or what would Buddha do in that situation? And I discovered for me it was about helping my community of people. And so I did voluntary work. So that's your motive. Now that number 3, I want to talk about oneness versus separation. And sometimes this happens when you get further developed into your spirituality. You might start your own group. Like I started a group called PASI, which is Palladians and Syrians International. But the problem with that group is that we're all helping each other, and that's okay. It's all right for me to want to help Starseeds help themselves, but it doesn't end there. In my group, I teach that we're here for all of humanity, for everybody. And that's the principle of oneness, that we're all in unity. So think carefully about, it also comes from your motive. Think carefully if you're creating spiritual groups on Facebook like I am, or if you're out there in your community and you're talking to various different people. And there is a tendency for spiritual people or New Age people, and also for starseeds, to start, if they move towards fear, they'll become non-inclusive. They'll become exclusive. So are you inclusive or exclusive? And when people get into fear, invariably what they do is they start closing themselves off, and they say, we're in this little group and we're going to protect ourselves because the world is dangerous. We've got Elon Musk doing Neuralink studies and wanting to create this artificial intelligence, future timeline for ourselves. So we have to protect ourselves, and there's a reptilian agenda out there, and they're doing naughty things, and so we've got to huddle together and keep ourselves safe. And that's okay. Well, actually, no, it's not okay, because you end up becoming closed-minded and closed in your group, and you're adhering to separation consciousness rather than oneness or unity consciousness. So every time you're behaving in your spiritual life or with your people or with your groups, just check in and say, are you inclusive or are you exclusive? Are you operating from trust or are you operating from fear? And are you closed or are you open? Like that theologian I talked about, have you got an inverted pyramid above your head, and are you accepting and bringing everybody and everything in? Or are you closing yourself off in fear? So that's number 3, oneness and separation. Now, number 4, vibration, which is obviously love. Now, what does vibration mean? The Beach Boys said, they had a song called Good, 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 Good Vibrations. And the scientists, they did a study and found dogs could read human vibration, whether or not they were a high vibration full of love and oneness, or are they descending in their vibration and becoming low. I had an ex-landlord who had a dog that was completely yappy and going crazy and full of anxiety, and this landlord, in my opinion, had kind of reptilian energy in their eyes and lots of fear. And so sometimes you'll notice that dogs can invariably tell when someone's a goodie or a baddie. So think about your vibration. If you're involved in spirituality as a beginner or intermediate or even advanced, even if you're an advanced teacher, what is your spiritual vibration like? So are you coming from love? And that should always be the number one prime motivator, is that it doesn't matter how successful you are, or how you dress, or how you want to look, or how worldly travelled, or how wise you are, or how philosophizing you are. The basics is that God is love, and we're an extension of God, so that we are love. So what's happening with your spiritual vibration? On a daily basis, are you generally operating from fear, or are you generally operating from love? Now, I have moments where I just have days when I'm feeling tired and my vibration goes down. That's fine. I'm not judging anybody for having a low vibration. Everybody has low vibrational moments, but you will have a baseline vibration of your soul, and through your spiritual life, what are you doing with that baseline? So mine is high, but it's doing this from time to time. Some people are medium and they're doing this from time to time. If some people are very low and they're involved in gangs or drugs, pee or all sorts of different things, they're going to be low. They might come up a tiny bit, but they'll drop quite low all the time. So what's your vibration doing? Just think about that. So even if you're really successful and proselytizing on stage and making lots of money, and you're looking good, but what's the vibration doing inside your heart? How much time are you spending in prayer and love, with tranquil, beautiful music and thinking about God in your life? So the one very easy sort of semi-scientific or way to discern where you're operating from is that when you work with angels, then that naturally happens when your vibration is high, is that you'll get certain signs and symptoms. So some of the obvious ones is people start seeing numbers. They start seeing 1111 on the clock, number sequences, and then as they increase their vibration, they might get goosebumps when they listen to very inspiring, beautiful music. Goosebumps are a sign of angel contact. And then when angels really see your vibration is increasing, they will show you their blue lights from their energy field. So you'll see piercing royal blue lights, or you might see like a purple mist, like a blue aura, a purple aura in your living room late at night when you're tired. So that's one way to find out what's happening with your vibration. So at different times in my life, my vibration's been high or low, and when my vibration's very high, some of these things happen. And also synchronicities start increasing, and you start seeing connections and meeting people. So those are really obvious signs that your vibration is high. And it's a good check-in to make sure with your Spirituality 101 basics that you're checking in with your love vibration, and that you're actually getting qualified by your angels, and they're showing you, yes, we can see that your vibration is high. Now we're going to give you some reaffirming, self-fulfilling prophecies, and the more high you raise your vibration as angels, we will work with you and help increase and hold and keep that vibration as high as possible. Do you have virtues? Are you a virtuous person? I think it's in Proverbs 31 or 32. It's the very end of Proverbs. I don't think it's Psalms in the Bible. They describe a virtuous woman. A virtuous woman is hardworking, toils the fields and comes home and is grateful towards her husband. I know some feminists might argue with me and say, well, that's a really old idea of what it is to be a woman. But anyway, it's a very, very beautiful piece of writing in the Bible about being virtuous, and it doesn't necessarily just have to relate to women in general. I think it can relate to women and men. So just think about your vibration coming from love, whether it's high or low, and can you maintain that vibration, and are you getting signs that you qualify from your angels, and are you focusing on being virtuous? Sorry, itchy nose again. Oh, it happens. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, number 5, discernment. Discernment basically means that are you a seeker of truth, and are you cleaving, left and right? Like Occam's razor. Occam's razor is really a philosophical method for discerning truth. Is that when you take away all the obvious things, that you remove the extraneous information in your spiritual reading or studying, is that what is left obviously must be true. So are you a seeker of truth? And also that information that you're studying, is that what is it serving? So think carefully when you're trying to discern whether something's right or wrong. Now there's ultimate truth, that God is love, and if you want to study that and study epistemology or philosophy of religion or whatever, there is ultimate truth, and the ultimate truth is love. And then there are relative truths that come underneath that. And some people in New Age spiritual talk about, that's my truth, as if there's a personal truth that only belongs to me, and you need to respect my truth. And if you don't respect my truth, that you're being judgmental, or you're being racist, or you're being, exclusionary, or whatever that might be. But it's very important to understand, in terms of spiritual discernment, that there is an ultimate truth, and there is God, and there is angels, and there is a higher truth, and there are relative truths on here and on earth. And we can be nice and fluffy and talk about your truth, and I want to respect your opinions and what you believe, and that's fine. But that is relative to the ultimate truth of what is actually epistemologically really, or ontologically really, really real, or really, really true. So when you're understanding about the information that you study or that you read, think about what that information is serving. Is there an agenda? Like when Elon Musk wants to create Neuralink and put electrodes in people's brains, why is he doing that? Is he serving some type of agenda? Does he have a motive for why he wants to do that? So everything you study from a spiritual angle, try and understand what that information is serving. Is there an agenda behind it? Hello Julian, hello Peter, and hello everybody who's watching. So there's an angelic agenda, and you can talk about Palladians and Sirians, and they're battling with another group of aliens called reptilians, who are the forces of darkness. So on planet Earth, there is a reptilian agenda behind the scenes of controlling people and keeping people into subservience or slavery. And then there's an angelic agenda to bring people to their spiritual truth, or their spiritual integrity. And so all of the information that you read, particularly through the New Age movement, can be serving one or the other agenda, either angelic, Palladian, Sirian, or reptilian. So this is a difficult problem for people in spirituality, is that how do you discern, how do you know the truth? What do you do? For me, there are a number of different guidelines, and I've given lots of talks before on discernment. One is it simple or is it complex? So sometimes spiritual 101, the basics, you can't go wrong with just simple basics like love or oneness, because they're enduring principles of which the universe is governed by. They're very, very basic, enduring principles that will never change. Spirituality ultimately will never really change. But unfortunately, when you get into commercial spirituality, like in the New Age movement, someone has to reinvent the wheel every 6 months because they have to sell a book, or sell a talk, or sell a podcast to make money. So spirituality, if you look at the history of spiritual knowledge since the 1950s or 60s or even earlier, spirituality of what you read and what you see on the internet has got a lot more complicated. Now we have people talking about portals, about 5D, about ascension symptoms, about artificial intelligence and timelines, and all sorts of different complex issues that I won't go into. So is the information simple or is it complex? And if it is complex, if you're reading something for the first time, think about that. What is that information serving? Is it serving an agenda? Is someone making money out of that? And is it ultimately empowering you to, if you're reading books about, ascension or 5D or recoding your DNA, if you think about your daily life, when you wake up at your breakfast table and you're eating your cornflakes or your Weet Bix or making your cup of tea, drinking your cup of tea, and you think about what serves your life and your family and your community ultimately, is it simple or is it complex? Is it angelic or is it reptilian? And as discernment is very, very difficult, particularly for beginners, and it's a kind of a trap that people fall into. And I don't want to talk about this too much because it'll start to sound like a rant. Unfortunately, that's what happens. And when you feed something too much energy, it goes into this downward spiral and moves into fear. So I want to keep it positive and fluffy. But there's a good side to discernment, is that if you get really good at discerning, you can get rid of a lot of time wasting and just say, I don't need to do that. And people will say to you, well, Edward, but you haven't read the theory on this, and you haven't read the book, and you haven't studied this. And you said, well, yes, I know maybe I haven't studied that particular thing, but I know the principles or the agenda on which it's founded upon, and I prefer to keep my life simple and pray and listen to beautiful music. And I've read things like that before, and they don't serve me. I'm not interested in 5D or ascension or whatever it is. I keep my life simple, and I concern myself with my family, with my friends, and I don't care whether or not Elon Musk is, creating some artificial intelligence in the future, or when UFOs are going to land on the front lawn of the White House, or whether or not the latest message in the recent, crop circle in Wiltshire is telling us that we've all got to, go into a air raid shelter and have bottled peaches on the wall. So you get my point. That's really important for discernment, is to stay centered in truth and common sense as well. Different seasons beckon different responses. That's right, Patrick. Sorry if its name's not Patrick. That's true. So anyway, I think it was number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're up to number 6. Number 6 I've called practice. Spiritual basics, spiritual 101 basics. Practice. What do you do? Now, this comes down to simplicity or complex as well. Is your spiritual practice very complicated or is it simple? Tell us what your heart wants to know in this moment. That's right. Yeah. Very good idea. So spiritual practices can get a bit complicated as well, but I find that spiritual practices, when you bring it down to the basics, they kind of often serve you better. So spirituality, generally you learn more when you spend time alone. I mean, you do learn a lot from being around people and studying, that's true. But when you're focusing on your heart center and getting out of your busy mind, some type of alone time or meditating or contemplation or prayer, and nature and being in the energies of spiritual energies of trees and the wilderness can be really hugely beneficial. So quite often when people want to get back to their spiritual basics, they'll go on a retreat, or they'll go for a walk in the forest, or they'll take some music with them, or they'll pray. So generally, when your spiritual practice is simple, and when you go back to the basics, you can have really powerful epiphanies. So if you're getting really complicated, particularly in your spiritual path, or even if you're famous, even if you're getting very advanced, people, and I have this problem as well, sometimes I spend too much time at home here or on camera, and I have to remind myself to go for a walk to the beach, and quite often it's in those alone times when you chill out, in nature on your own, that you actually get your angelic messages, or reaffirm or you re-find yourself again, and that can be hugely important. So if that was number 6, number 7, I've talked about your goal, or now really when I say goal, I mean you can have a goal for your life which is a personal goal, but then you can have a goal for your life which is your community goal. But I think I'm also referencing the ultimate goal for the planet, and I think that's really, really good as a spiritual basics, as a basic principle, to think about the goal for you and your community or your family, and then ultimately for the planet. Like, what is everybody serving? Where are we going? And why are we doing this? And where ultimately, where are we headed? And I think it's good to ponder that, and sometimes there are ways in which you can serve that or discover your role in that. If you're a sculptor, if you're a, I don't know, someone who makes hats for a living, or if you're work in communities as a teacher or a speech pathologist or whatever your role is, where do you fit in the ultimate scheme of things? And it's really helpful to think about your virtues and your values, and also your career, and whether or not you fit into the ultimate goal, the ultimate planetary goal of God or the angels or our soul, our collective, if you like. And I think that's really, really helpful. A friend of mine's been watching a wonderful TV series called The Orville, and I really like watching The Orville because The Orville has this sense of an ultimate planetary goal. And Star Trek does that as well, of course, but The Orville is kind of special in the way that it does that. It creates a bright and wondrous future for us, which I really approve of. There are some things that they do. Someone's messaging me. Okay. There are some things that they do in The Orville which are a little bit silly, and they're not on the correct agenda, in my opinion. Like in the last episode, the doctor had a wedding ceremony and she married a robot. And some people would get fearful and say, well, that's pushing what my friend called the AI timeline, that Elon Musk wants to put electrodes in people's brains, and the reptilians are trying to make us subservient, make us slaves, and all, have us jacked into the matrix, with all the batteries, fields of, little babies, but, whatever. So ultimately, I think it's really good in terms of spiritual basics to think about your life, your service, your career, being involved in some ultimate planetary direction or goal, or and I think we're all moving in some direction. The planet's, we've been through a lot, COVID, war in Ukraine, various different things, but we're always kind of moving forward, and I think it's always good to remind yourself as to how you feel about that, and what you observe, and what your role in this is, and what groups you're involved in, and what message are you pushing or are you engendering, and what you're doing with your love vibration, and how you serve yourself and others in your community. So that's Spirituality 101, the basics. And I just wanted to remind people that it's always important to come back to the basics, that often spirituality is quite simple. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. My personal feeling about some of the things that are going on in the New Age movement, about 5D and ascension, and lots of these things are too complicated, and some of them are actually serving the reptilian agenda. They want to keep us off the basics, and they want to get us worried or running around, busy and distracted. They're really distractions in essence. I do believe the planet is evolving. I don't necessarily believe in, special energies or portals or ascension or anything. I think a lot of that, or for me personally, is a reptilian distraction. So keeping it light and fluffy, the basics is what will serve you best, in my opinion. Everything I've studied. So I hope that helps someone. I'm getting lots of messages from Patrick, and I'm not sure about them, so I'll just, if he wants to message me separately, that's fine. But this is a good time to finish. I hope that helps someone. Bye for now.